Hi and welcome to this lecture. Our main aim now is to understand how can you use ggplot function in order to create box plots. So first, we are going to use this dataset which shows the stock returns. So I'm going to name this returns and I'm going to say read.csv. So I'm going to come here and say stock underscore returns. Okay, so if I come here and say the head of returns, all right, so we simply have the name of the stock as well as the returns on that particular day. Okay, so now what we want to do is we want to create box plots. So we're first going to start by creating a box plot where we compare the distributions of stock returns in different companies. So how can you do that? So come here and say ggplots. Remember, we have to pass in the dataset. And in this case, the dataset's name is returns. Okay. Remember, we have to add the layers. So geom underscore boxplots. So let me move this a little bit. Okay. So the first thing, we want to specify the aesthetics. So we want to specify the stock in the x-axis and we want the returns in the y-axis. So I hope you're not getting confused. We are simply just specifying the aesthetics in the x-axis. We want the stock, or we can say the name of the stock, right? And then in the y-axis, we want the returns. So if you run this, so here we have managed to list all the stock from these companies, Apple, Amazon, Facebook, Google, and Microsoft, right? And we're looking at the returns of these stocks from these companies. Okay, now let's say we want to have a horizontal box plot. Okay, as usual, we are going to use the coordinate flip, right? And if you run this, you will now observe that we have flipped the coordinate axis. Okay, if you can remember, we have notches, right? And the notches are mostly used to compare the medians, right? So in this case, we come here, I'm going to remove this, okay, and then we come here and we specify notch and we have to set that to be equals to true, right? And if you observed here, we have managed to create a graphic, and in this case, we have created notches. Now, let's say we want the returns now displayed on top of the box plot, right? So in order to do that, we can make use of a jitter plot. Okay, so let's come in here and say ggplot. We're gonna say ggplot and we pass in our data set, which is returns. Okay, now instead of having the aesthetics inside geom underscore boxplot, we are going to have the aesthetics here where we specify that in the x-axis, I'm going to clear the console. In the x-axis, what we want is we want the stock, and then in the y-axis, we want the returns. Okay, and we are going to say geom underscore box plot. And if you run this, we have simply created a box plot, right? But now we want to be able to plot the returns on top of these boxes. And in order to do that, we are going to use geom underscore jitter. Okay. And if you run this, you observe we have now able to not only have only the box plot, but also we are able to plot the returns as points on top of these box plots, right? So we have created first the box plots, which shows the returns, the distribution of the returns for each company, and then we've been able to plot also the returns on top of these points. So we can also go ahead and simply just change the color. Say for example we change the color to blue. You observe that now these returns are plotted in blue color. So this is also an example of how you can make use of geom_jitter. Okay, now we have a situation as usual in statistics where we have outliers. So how can we be able to highlight those outliers? Okay, so with ggplot we can be able to even highlight the outliers, right, by modifying their appearances such as color, the shape, the size, as well as the transparency. So we're gonna have ggplot, and then we pass in our data, which is returns, right? And now we want to come here and say boxplots. So we're gonna add the aesthetics now. Okay, so in the x-axis we have stock, then in the y-axis we'll have the returns. So if you run this, so this is what we have. Now when it's come to modifying the appearance of outliers, so what we can do here is we can come here and say outlier. So you see, R provides us with a number of options or arguments that we can add in order to modify the appearance of the outliers. So let's say here we come here and say we want the color of the outliers to be red. So if you come here in your R graphic, you will observe now that we have changed the color of the outliers to be red. So that is how you can change the color of your outliers, right? We can also change the shape, right? As you observed, we have multiple options. So in order to change the shape, we're going to come here and say outlier dot, and then we use shape. Okay, let's say we use 23. So if you come here and you try to zoom, we have changed the appearance of our outliers by changing the shape. Okay, we can also look at the size. So what about the size? So let's come here and say outlier dot. So if you come here and say outlier dot, you can see we also have the size. So if you say 3, you observe we have changed the size of our outliers. Okay, so that is how you can change the appearance of your outliers. So what about the transparency, right? We can also play around with transparency of the outliers, right? Remember that it takes values between 0 and 1, right? So we come in here and say the size is 3, and come and say outlier dot. Let's say we also want to display the color, for example. So let's come in here and say the color is going to be blue. And now with transparency, we have to specify alpha. Remember, it takes values between 0 and 1. So let's say 0.3. So now you come here, you can observe that the transparency of these outliers. Remember, if you increase the value for the transparency here in this case, so if you come in here and you say this value over here is 0.6, you observe the more the transparency of your points decreases. Okay, but if the value is small, your points are going to be more transparent. So that is how you can play around with the transparency. So what we have done in this lecture is that we have been able to see how can we modify even the appearance of the outliers. We looked at the color, the transparency, the size. Okay, so that is how you can play around with the outliers.